I watched from across the hospital conference room as my sister Emma's face drained of color, her perfectly manicured hands trembling around the acceptance letter she'd stolen from my desk 3 months ago, the letter that was supposed to be mine, the letter to the prestigious creative writing MFA program at Columbia University. "I'm sorry," Dean Richardson said, his voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "But we've discovered significant plagiarism in your application portfolio, Miss Carter. The stories you submitted were stolen verbatim from your sister's unpublished manuscripts." Emma's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. I should have felt triumphant. In my past life, I would have been destroyed by this moment. But now, standing here in my crisp white medical coat with my Johns Hopkins neurosurgery residency offer letter tucked safely in my portfolio, I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. None of this was supposed to happen. But then again, I wasn't supposed to die at 28, alone in a psychiatric ward, my creative dreams shattered, my family's cruelty having driven me to the brink of madness. The memories of my previous life crashed over me in waves, as they had every day since I'd opened my eyes on the morning of my 18th birthday, 6 months before college applications were due. I'd woken up gasping, my 28-year-old consciousness crammed back into my teenage body, with 10 years of bitter memories flooding my brain like poison. In that first life, I'd been so naive, so hopeful. I'd loved writing since I was 7 years old, filling notebook after notebook with stories, characters, entire worlds sprung from my imagination. My English teachers praised my work. I won local competitions. By senior year of high school, I had a collection of short stories I'd polished until they gleamed, ready to submit to the top creative writing programs in the country. I was going to be a writer. It was the only thing I'd ever wanted. My parents, David and Margaret Carter, had other ideas. They'd always made it clear that Emma was the golden child, the beautiful one, the one destined for greatness. I was just the awkward, bookish older daughter who spent too much time in her own head. Emma was 2 years younger, but she'd always gotten everything she wanted. The bigger bedroom, the newer clothes, the private violin lessons, the encouragement and praise I desperately craved. "Creative writing?" my mother had scoffed when I told them my plans. "That's not a real career, Claire. You need something practical, teaching maybe, or nursing." "I'm applying to Columbia's creative writing program," I'd insisted, my voice small but determined. "It's one of the best in the country." My father hadn't even looked up from his newspaper. "We're not paying for that nonsense. If you want to waste your time on stories, do it in your spare time. Pick a real major." But I'd been stubborn. I'd applied anyway, using my babysitting money for the application fees. I'd gotten in. Full scholarship. Columbia University wanted me. Me, not Emma. Not my parents' perfect daughter. Me. I'd hidden the acceptance letter in my desk drawer, planning to tell them once I figured out how to make them understand. I'd been so stupid, so trusting. Emma had found it while snooping through my room, as she always did. And instead of congratulating me, instead of being happy for her sister, she'd done what she always did. She'd taken what was mine and made it hers. "Mom, Dad," she'd announced at dinner that night, her voice dripping with fake excitement. "I've decided what I want to study in college. Creative writing! At Columbia, isn't that amazing?" I'd frozen, my fork halfway to my mouth. "What?" "I've always loved writing," Emma continued, not even glancing at me. "I've been working on some stories in secret, and I really think I have talent. Claire inspired me." My mother's face had lit up in a way it never did for me. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Of course we'll support you. Columbia is such a prestigious school." "But I'd started to say. "Oh, Claire," my mother had interrupted, her tone dismissive. "So, don't be jealous. It's not attractive. You can still apply to teaching programs. There are plenty of state schools that would take you." I'd tried to tell them about my acceptance letter. I'd tried to explain that I'd already gotten in, that this was my dream, my future. But Emma had cried, claiming I was trying to steal her dreams, and my parents had taken her side. They always took her side. Within a week, Emma had discovered my stories hidden in my laptop. She'd copied them, claimed them as her own, and submitted them to Columbia with her own application. When Columbia sent me a rejection letter citing duplicate submissions, I'd been devastated. They thought I was the plagiarist. They thought I'd copied my own sister. Emma got into Columbia on my work. My parents paid her full tuition. I ended up at a community college studying business administration because my father said it was practical. I never wrote another story. The next 10 years had been a slow descent into hell. Emma graduated from Columbia with honors, her thesis, stolen from my notebooks, earning critical praise. She got a book deal, then another. She became a best-selling author while I worked as a receptionist at a dental office. My creative spirit crushed, my identity erased. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how my family treated me, how they wielded Emma's success like a weapon against me. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" my mother would say, every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every family gathering where Emma would sweep in wearing designer clothes bought with money from my stories. "She made something of herself. You just gave up." I hadn't given up. I'd been destroyed. There's a difference. By the time I was 25, I'd stopped going to family events. By 26, I'd stopped answering their calls. By 27, I'd attempted suicide for the first time. The depression had swallowed me whole. The knowledge that I'd had everything stolen from me and no one believed me, eating away at my sanity like acid. Emma published her fourth bestseller the day I was admitted to the psychiatric ward for the second time. The book was dedicated to my family who always believed in me. Not a single word of thanks to the sister whose stories she'd built her empire on. I died in that ward. Pills stolen from the nurse's cart. I'd been so tired, so defeated. I just wanted it to stop. Instead, I woke up 10 years earlier, 18 years old again, with all my memories intact and a burning fury in my chest that felt like swallowing fire. The second I'd realized what had happened, that I'd somehow been given another chance, I'd made a plan. Not a plan for revenge, not yet. First, a plan for survival, for success, for becoming someone Emma couldn't touch, couldn't copy, couldn't steal from. I'd locked my bedroom door, logged into my laptop, and deleted every story I'd ever written. Every single one. 10 years of work, gone. It had hurt like cutting off a limb, but I'd learned the hard way that anything I loved, Emma would take. So I removed the ammunition. Then I'd researched. In my previous life, I'd been so focused on creative writing that I'd ignored everything else. But I'd always been good at science, had always found biology and chemistry fascinating in a distant, abstract way. What if I'd pursued that instead? More importantly, what if I pursued something Emma could never copy? Something that required years of rigorous study, natural aptitude, and genuine dedication, none of which Emma possessed. She was beautiful and charming and knew how to manipulate people, but she'd never been willing to work hard for anything. She'd coasted through high school on her looks and my parents' money, getting tutors to do her homework, buying test answers from smarter students. Medicine. The answer came to me like a lightning bolt. Emma would never, could never become a doctor. She'd faint at the sight of blood. She'd failed chemistry twice in high school. She had no patience for memorization, no tolerance for the grueling study required. And most importantly, you couldn't plagiarize your way through medical school. You had to actually know the material, actually perform the procedures, actually save lives. It was perfect. I'd spent the next 6 months transforming myself. I'd studied obsessively, bringing my grades up from A's to A+s. I'd volunteered at the local hospital, shadowing doctors, learning everything I could about medicine. I'd joined the pre-med club at school, attended lectures, networked with professionals. I'd taken the SAT again and scored in the 99th rank. And I'd watched Emma carefully, waiting to see what she would do. At first, she'd been confused by my sudden disinterest in writing. "Why aren't you working on your stories anymore?" she'd asked one night, her tone falsely concerned as she lingered in my doorway. "Lost interest," I'd said shortly, not looking up from my anatomy textbook. "I'm thinking about medicine now." I'd seen the flash of relief in her eyes. Good. Let her think I'd given up on my dreams. Let her think the path was clear. She'd started snooping more aggressively after that, searching my room when I was at school, trying to log into my computer. But there was nothing to find. I'd learned to keep everything important in my head, And what I did write down, I kept in a locked safe only I knew the combination to. 3 months before college applications were due, Emma had announced her decision at dinner with her characteristic dramatic flair. "I've been thinking a lot about my future," she'd said, twirling her hair around her finger. "And I've decided I want to be a writer, a creative writer. I'm going to apply to Columbia's MFA program." I'd felt my mother's eyes on me, waiting for me to react, to fight back, to give Emma the satisfaction of my pain. Instead, I'd smiled. "That's great, Emma," I'd said, and I'd meant it. "I'm sure you'll do wonderfully. I'm applying to pre-med programs myself. Johns Hopkins is my top choice." The confusion on Emma's face had been delicious. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I was supposed to fight her for it, supposed to care, supposed to give her something to steal. My mother had frowned. "Medicine? Since when are you interested in medicine?" "Since I started volunteering at the hospital," I'd explained calmly. "I've been shadowing Dr. Patterson in the ER for 6 months now. She's writing me a recommendation letter for Hopkins." "But you've always been so focused on writing," my father had said, his tone suspicious. I'd shrugged. People change. I realized I wanted to do something that actually helps people, something practical and respectable. Writing is just a hobby. It had been the perfect thing to say. My parents, who'd always criticized my creative ambitions, couldn't argue with medicine. Emma, who'd been gearing up to steal my writing dreams, had nothing left to take. Except she'd tried anyway. I'd known she would. I'd counted on it. 2 months before application deadlines, I'd deliberately left my laptop unlocked, with a folder prominently labeled Columbia Application visible on the desktop. Inside the folder were my writing samples, stories I'd crafted specifically for this purpose, stories that were good enough to be impressive but contained subtle, traceable markers that would prove they were mine. I'd embedded specific phrases, character names, and plot points that connected to my old journals, the ones I'd kept hidden but knew Emma had photographed years ago in my first life. I'd included references to family events only I would remember in specific detail. I'd even woven in factual errors about creative writing techniques that Emma, who'd never actually studied writing formally, wouldn't catch. Then I'd gone out for my hospital shift, leaving my bedroom door unlocked. When I'd come home, my laptop had been moved slightly. The folder had been accessed. Emma had taken the bait. I'd waited 2 weeks before discovering the theft, timing it perfectly so I could confront her at dinner when our parents were present. "Emma," I'd said, my voice carefully controlled, "did you go through my laptop?" She'd blinked innocently. "What? No, why would I?" "Because I had some files on there, some writing samples I was working on for fun, and now they're gone, deleted." "That's weird," she'd said, but I'd seen the flash of panic in her eyes. She hadn't deleted them. She'd been too excited about stealing them to cover her tracks properly. "Maybe you deleted them by accident?" "Maybe," I'd said, letting it drop. "It's fine. They weren't important anyway, just silly stories." But I'd kept backups, multiple backups, with timestamps, with metadata, with every piece of evidence I'd need to prove they were mine. Then I'd submitted my real applications: Johns Hopkins for pre-med, Harvard for biology, Stanford for neuroscience. I didn't send anything to Columbia's creative writing program because I didn't need to. That path was Emma's now, paved with stolen words that would crumble beneath her feet. The acceptance letters had started arriving in March. Johns Hopkins, Harvard, Stanford. All three wanted me, offering scholarships and research opportunities. My parents had been shocked, their disbelief almost comical. "Medicine?" my mother had said, holding my Johns Hopkins acceptance letter like it might bite her. "You really got into Johns Hopkins?" "Full scholarship," I'd confirmed, "with a guaranteed spot in their neurosurgery residency program if I maintain my GPA." My father had actually looked impressed for the first time in my life. That's quite an achievement, Claire." Emma had been silent, her face pale. She'd already submitted her Columbia application, using my stolen stories. She was waiting for her acceptance letter, confident that she'd secured her golden ticket the same way she'd stolen everything else from me. I'd almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The Columbia rejection letter had arrived on a Tuesday. I'd been home from school, supposedly sick with the flu, but really, I'd wanted to be there for this moment. I'd wanted to see her face. Emma had opened the letter in the kitchen, with our mother hovering anxiously beside her. I'd watched from the doorway, silent, invisible as always. "Thank you for your application," Emma had read aloud, her voice cracking. "However, we regret to inform you that we cannot offer you admission to our program at this time. During our review process, we discovered substantial concerns regarding the originality of your submitted writing samples." My mother had Mia and Ace gasped. "What? What does that mean?" Emma's hands had been shaking. "They think I plagiarized." "That's ridiculous," my mother had said immediately defensively. "Your work is original. Tell them, Claire. Tell them Emma's stories are her own." I'd stepped into the kitchen, my expression carefully neutral. "Are they, Emma?" The color had drained from her face. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying those stories you submitted were the same ones that disappeared from my laptop 2 months ago. The ones I'd written for fun. The ones that were time-stamped to my computer, with edit histories showing months of my work." "You're lying," Emma had hissed, but the panic in her eyes betrayed her. I'd pulled out my phone, loaded up the cloud backup I'd prepared. "I have proof. Every draft, every revision, every timestamp. The stories are mine, Emma. You stole them, just like you were planning to steal my Columbia application in the first place." "That's absurd," my mother had shouted. "Claire, how dare you accuse your sister?" "I already sent the evidence to Columbia," I'd interrupted, my voice calm. They were very interested to see that the stories they received from Emma Carter were identical to the ones I'd been working on for months, complete with edit histories proving I was the original author. They called me last week to apologize for the confusion and to offer me a spot in their program. That part was a lie. Columbia had called, but I'd turned them down. I didn't want their program anymore. But Emma didn't need to know that. Emma had burst into tears, her perfectly applied mascara running down her cheeks in black rivers. "Mom, she's making this up. She's jealous because I'm talented and she's not." But even my mother had hesitated, looking between us with growing doubt. "Claire, do you really have proof?" I'd shown her the timestamps, the edit histories, the Google Docs version history showing months of my revisions, the photos I'd taken of my handwritten notes, dated and timestamped, the emails to myself containing early drafts sent weeks before Emma had decided to pursue writing. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable, and watching my mother's face as she realized the truth, that her golden child was a thief and a fraud, had been more satisfying than any revenge I could have imagined. "Emma," my mother had whispered, horrified, "did you steal Claire's work?" Emma had tried to deny it, tried to lie, but she'd never been good under pressure. Within minutes, she had dissolved into hysterical sobs, admitting everything between gasps. How she'd been snooping through my things for years, how she'd copied my stories, how she'd planned to build her writing career on my talent because she didn't have any of her own. My father had been silent through the entire confrontation, his face carved from stone. When Emma had finally run out of words, he'd turned to me. "Why didn't you tell us she was doing this?" "Would you have believed me?" I'd asked quietly. His silence was answer enough. That had been 3 months ago. Since then, Emma had tried to salvage her college prospects, but the plagiarism scandal had followed her everywhere. Columbia had blacklisted her. Other writing programs had rejected her applications once they learned about the theft. She'd ended up enrolling in the local community college, the same one I'd attended in my previous life, studying general education because she didn't know what else to do. Meanwhile, I'd thrived. I'd graduated valedictorian, delivered a speech about perseverance and integrity that had made Emma leave the auditorium in tears. I'd spent the summer completing an intensive research internship at Johns Hopkins, working in their neurosurgery department, assisting with groundbreaking studies on brain trauma recovery. I'd finally told my parents about what Emma had done in my previous life, or what she'd planned to do since I couldn't exactly explain the time travel aspect. I'd framed it as a pattern I'd discovered, showing them the evidence of her academic dishonesty throughout high school, the purchased test answers, the plagiarized essays, the times she'd cheated on exams. Evidence I'd carefully documented this time around, knowing they'd need proof to overcome their bias. My mother had been devastated. My father had been angry, but they couldn't deny the truth anymore. Their perfect daughter was a fraud, and the daughter they'd ignored and dismissed was the one with real talent, real integrity, real value. Emma had tried to apologize, had begged for forgiveness, had claimed she was just inspired by my work and didn't mean to plagiarize. But I'd seen this performance before. In my past life, she'd never apologized, never admitted wrongdoing. This act was just another manipulation, and I wasn't falling for it. "Save it," I'd told her coldly. "I know who you are. I've always known." But Emma wasn't finished. She never was. In my previous life, even after stealing my dreams, she'd continued to sabotage me, to undermine me, to ensure I stayed beneath her. I'd known she'd try something similar this time, some desperate attempt to drag me down to her level. I'd been prepared. It had started with small things. My medical textbooks going missing, coffee accidentally spilled on my research notes, my alarm being turned off before important exams. I'd documented everything, set up hidden cameras in my room, and waited for her to escalate. She had, of course. 2 weeks before I was supposed to leave for Johns Hopkins, Emma had tried to poison me. Not kill me, she wasn't that bold, but enough to make me sick, to make me miss my orientation, to sabotage my fresh start. She'd slipped prescription anxiety medication into my coffee, pills she'd stolen from my mother's medicine cabinet. In my previous life, I'd taken those same pills voluntarily, prescribed by psychiatrists trying to manage my depression. The irony was almost poetic. But I'd been watching. I'd seen her drop them in my cup while I was in the bathroom. I'd switched the cups while her back was turned, then watched as she'd drunk her own poisoned coffee and spent the next 12 hours violently ill, confessing everything to our parents while high on her own sedatives. That had been the final straw. My parents had finally seen Emma for what she truly was. My father had demanded she move out. My mother had cut her off financially. They'd apologized to me, profusely and tearfully, begging me to forgive them for years of favoritism and neglect. I'd accepted their apologies because they were my parents and some part of me still loved them. But I'd made it clear that my relationship with Emma was over, dead. She was nothing to me now but a cautionary tale. Which brought me to today, to this hospital conference room, to the moment I'd been waiting for. After the poisoning incident, Emma had spiraled. She'd dropped out of community college, unable to handle the shame and the academic rigor without being able to cheat. She'd tried to start a blog claiming to be a fiction writer, but without my stories to steal, she'd produced nothing but derivative, poorly written garbage that attracted no readers. Desperate and delusional, she'd made one final attempt to reclaim her stolen glory. She'd applied to Columbia again, this time submitting stories she claimed to have written years ago, stories that were, predictably, more of my work that she'd stolen from my old journals. But this time, Columbia had been watching. This time, they'd contacted me directly to verify, and this time, I'd had my lawyers draft a cease and desist letter and file a formal plagiarism charges. Dean Richardson, Columbia's writing program director, had requested a formal hearing. He'd wanted to address this in person to make it clear that Columbia took academic integrity seriously. He'd invited me to attend, along with my parents, to witness the final resolution. Emma had walked in thinking she had one more chance. She'd dressed in her best outfit, styled her hair perfectly, prepared her most convincing lies. She'd thought she could charm her way through this like she'd charmed her way through everything else in her life. She'd thought wrong. The stories in question, Dean Richardson continued, pulling up documents on his laptop, show clear evidence of being written by Claire Carter, not Emma Carter. The writing style, the thematic elements, the specific character development, all match Claire's documented body of work. Furthermore, we found that several passages were lifted word for word from Claire's notebooks, which she's provided as evidence. Emma's lawyer, a public defender my parents had refused to pay for, tried to object. My client maintains that these stories were collaborative efforts, but there was no collaboration, I said, my voice cutting through the room like ice. Emma stole my work. She's been stealing my work for years. She has no original creative talent of her own. Everything she's ever submitted has been plagiarized from me or other sources. That's not true, Emma shrieked, her composure finally shattering. You're just jealous. You've always been jealous of me. I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt nothing but pity. Jealous of what, Emma? Your fake achievements? Your stolen success? I'm about to start my first year at Johns Hopkins, studying neurosurgery, on my own merit. What do you have? What have you ever earned on your own? She had no answer. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Dean Richardson cleared his throat. Columbia University takes plagiarism very seriously. Emma Carter has been permanently blacklisted from our institution and all partner schools. Furthermore, we're recommending that formal charges be filed with the Academic Integrity Board, which may result in a permanent mark on her academic record, preventing her from attending any accredited university. My mother, sitting beside me, had tears streaming down her face. Not for Emma, for me, for the daughter she'd failed to protect, to believe in, to love the way I'd deserved. My father's hand was on my shoulder, supportive, for the first time in my life. Emma collapsed into her chair, her dreams, my stolen dreams, crumbling around her like dust. The aftermath had been swift and brutal. Within a week, Emma's plagiarism scandal had gone viral. Someone had leaked the story to social media, and suddenly, everyone was talking about the sociopathic sister who stole her sibling's future. Think pieces were written about sibling rivalry, family dysfunction, and academic fraud. Emma's face was plastered across Twitter, Instagram, Reddit. She'd tried to defend herself online, tried to claim she was the real victim, but the internet is unforgiving. People dug up every lie she'd ever told, every test she'd cheated on, every paper she'd plagiarized in high school. Former classmates came forward with stories of her manipulation and cruelty. The picture painted was damning. Emma had a mental breakdown. A real one. Not the fake ones she'd performed for sympathy over the years. She'd been hospitalized, diagnosed with severe personality disorders, put on medication. My parents had visited her exactly once before deciding that tough love was the only way forward. We enabled her, my mother had confessed to me one night, her voice thick with guilt. We made her think she could take whatever she wanted without consequences. We failed both of you. I'd hugged her because she was trying, because she genuinely seemed remorseful. But I'd also made it clear that repairing our relationship would take time, effort, and genuine change. I wasn't going to be their consolation prize now that Emma had revealed herself to be a monster. Johns Hopkins had been everything I dreamed and more. Medical school was brutal. The studying, the exams, the endless hours of memorization and practical application. But I loved it. I loved the challenge, the precision, the satisfaction of mastering complex material. I loved the feeling of helping people, of using my brain to solve real problems. I'd specialized in neurosurgery, the most competitive and demanding field. It required not just intelligence, but artistic skill, steady hands, and the ability to perform under extreme pressure. It was everything Emma could never be: rigorous, unforgiving, impossible to fake. By my third year, I was publishing research papers. By my fifth year, I was assisting in groundbreaking surgeries. By the time I completed my residency, I had job offers from the top hospitals in the country. I chose Johns Hopkins, accepting a position as an attending neurosurgeon specializing in brain trauma. The same hospital where I'd started as a volunteer, where I'd discovered my calling, where I'd built my future from the ashes of my stolen past. Emma's life, meanwhile, had followed a predictable trajectory downward. After her hospitalization, she'd attempted to reinvent herself. She'd started a YouTube channel trying to become an influencer, but her past followed her. Every video was flooded with comments about the plagiarism scandal. She'd tried to write a book, a memoir about overcoming sibling rivalry, but no publisher would touch her. She'd even tried to sue me for defamation, claiming I'd ruined her reputation, but the lawsuit was thrown out immediately. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation, and everything I'd said about her was provably true. She'd cycled through jobs, retail, food service, administrative work. Nothing stuck. She had no real skills, no work ethic, no ability to function in an environment where she couldn't charm or manipulate her way to success. My parents had cut her off completely after she tried to steal my mother's jewelry to sell online. Emma had been living in a studio apartment in a bad part of town, barely making rent, her dreams of literary glory long dead. I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd blamed me for everything. According to her narrative, I was the villain, the jealous sister who'd sabotaged her out of spite. She'd convinced herself that she was the talented one, that I'd stolen her work and framed her for plagiarism. The delusion would have been sad if it wasn't so predictable. Emma had never been capable of accepting responsibility for her actions. In her mind, she was always the victim, always the wronged party. That's what made her dangerous. That's what had destroyed me in my first life. But not this time. This time, I'd won. 5 years after that confrontation at Columbia, I was living the life I should have had from the beginning. I was Dr. Claire Carter, one of the youngest attending neurosurgeons at Johns Hopkins, with a reputation for excellence and innovation. I'd published dozens of papers, presented at international conferences, and trained the next generation of surgeons. I'd bought a beautiful townhouse in Baltimore filled with books I actually had time to read now. I'd found a balance between my demanding career and my personal life. I'd even started writing again, not for publication, just for myself, just for the joy of creating stories that no one could steal. I'd learned that revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about building a life so successful, so fulfilling, that their attempts to tear you down become irrelevant. Emma had tried to steal my future, but she'd only stolen stories. The real treasure, my resilience, my intelligence, my capacity for growth, had always been beyond her reach. My parents and I had rebuilt our relationship slowly, carefully. They'd gone to therapy, worked on understanding why they'd favored Emma so completely, and made genuine efforts to make amends. We had dinner together once a month now, conversations that felt more real than any we'd had before. They'd finally seen me as I was, capable, talented, worthy of love and respect. They'd asked once if I wanted to reconcile with Emma. I'd said no without hesitation. Some bridges, once burned, shouldn't be rebuilt. Emma had her chance in my first life, and she'd used it to destroy me. In this life, she'd lost that chance before she could even try. The final piece of my revenge came on a Tuesday afternoon, 7 years after my rebirth. I was in my office at Hopkins reviewing patient files when my secretary buzzed me. "Dr. Carter, there's someone here to see you. She says she's your sister." I'd known this moment would come eventually. Emma had always been predictable. Now that I was successful, now that I had everything she'd wanted, she'd come crawling back looking for money or favors or some way to leech off my success. "Send her in," I said calmly. Emma looked terrible. She'd aged badly, stress and poor life choices etched into her face. Her clothes were shabby, her hair dull and poorly cut. She looked like what she was: a failure, a cautionary tale, a woman who'd bet everything on her ability to steal from others and lost. "Claire," she said, her voice small. "Thank you for seeing me." I leaned back in my chair, studying her. In my previous life, she'd been vibrant and confident, cruel in her beauty and power. Now she was diminished, powerless. It should have felt more satisfying than it did. "What do you want, Emma?" "I came to apologize," she said, and for the first time in her life, she actually sounded sincere. "For everything. For stealing your stories. For trying to poison you. For all the years of cruelty. I've been in therapy and I finally started to understand what I did to you." I waited. There had to be more. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she continued. "I know I don't deserve it, but I wanted you to know that I'm sorry and that I'm proud of you. You became everything I pretended to be. You're brilliant and talented, and you did it all on your own." It was the closest thing to genuine remorse I'd ever heard from her. Maybe therapy had actually helped. Maybe hitting rock bottom had forced her to confront her own toxicity. "Thank you for saying that," I said neutrally, "but I meant what I said 7 years ago. We're not sisters anymore, Emma. What you did to me both times isn't something I can forgive or forget." Her face crumpled. "I understand." "I hope you find peace," I continued, and I meant it. Not because I'd forgiven her, but because her pain no longer affected me. Her suffering didn't bring me joy. She was simply irrelevant to my life now. I hope your therapy helps. I hope you build something real for yourself. Something that's actually yours. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'm trying. I'm working as a receptionist at a dental office. I almost laughed. The same job I'd had in my previous life. The poetry of it was almost too perfect. And I'm taking night classes, community college, just general education for now, but I'm thinking about, I don't know, maybe social work, helping people who've made mistakes like I did. That sounds like a good fit, I said. And I was being honest. Emma had always been good at reading people, at understanding their weaknesses. In the right context, with the right guidance, those skills could actually help others instead of destroying them. She stood, wiping her tears. I should go. I needed you to know that I'm sorry, that I know what I took from you, and that I'm genuinely happy you succeeded despite me. I walked her to the door. At the threshold, she turned back. What you said at the Columbia hearing, she said quietly, about me having no original talent. You were right. I've never created anything of value in my life. Everything I had was stolen from you. And now you're here, saving lives, and I'm... She trailed off, her voice breaking. You can still create something, Emma, I said, surprising myself with the gentleness in my tone. You're 28 years old. That's young. You have time to build a real life, to develop real skills, to become someone worthy of respect. But only if you actually try. Only if you stop looking for shortcuts and do the work. She nodded, fresh tears falling. I know, I'm trying to learn that. After she left, I stood at my office window, looking out over the Baltimore skyline. I felt strange, not triumphant exactly, but peaceful, complete. Emma had taken everything from me once, and it had destroyed me. But given a second chance, I'd built a life she could never touch, never steal, never diminish. I'd become someone strong enough that her cruelty couldn't break me, successful enough that her theft was meaningless, powerful enough that her attempts at sabotage were laughable. That was the real victory, not her suffering, not her failure, but my absolute unassailable success. 10 years after my rebirth, I was giving the keynote speech at the American Association of Neurological Surgeons annual conference. The audience was packed with thousands of doctors from around the world, all there to hear about my groundbreaking research on brain trauma recovery. I stood at the podium in my tailored suit, looking out at the sea of faces, and felt a surge of gratitude for the impossible gift I'd been given. A second chance. A do-over. An opportunity to rewrite my story with knowledge and purpose. My parents were in the front row, beaming with pride. My colleagues and students filled the next several rows. And somewhere in the world, Emma was living a small, quiet life, hopefully learning to be content with less, hopefully building something real. I'd heard she'd graduated from community college with decent grades. She was working as a social worker now, helping at-risk youth. Not the glamorous life she'd dreamed of, not the literary celebrity she'd tried to steal from me, but honest work, real work, work that mattered. Maybe she'd finally learned, maybe she'd finally grown, maybe the therapy and the consequences and the hard lessons had changed her into someone better. Or maybe not. Honestly, it didn't matter to me anymore, because I'd learned the most important lesson of all. You can't build a life on stolen dreams. You can't fake your way to genuine success. And you can't destroy someone who refuses to stay broken. Emma had tried to steal my future, but she'd only ever had access to the surface level. My stories, my applications, my apparent dreams. She'd never understood the deeper truth, that success comes from resilience, from genuine talent, from the willingness to work harder than anyone else even when the world is against you. Those qualities couldn't be plagiarized. They couldn't be stolen from a laptop or copied from a notebook. They had to be earned, forged through struggle and pain and the determination to become something better than your circumstances suggested was possible. I had died in my first life. I'd been broken, destroyed, driven to suicide by the cumulative weight of my sister's cruelty and my family's indifference. But I'd been given something miraculous. Another chance. And I'd used it not just to avoid my previous mistakes, but to become someone extraordinary, someone who saved lives instead of just writing about them, someone who turned pain into purpose and betrayal into fuel for success. As I began my speech, looking out at the audience of brilliant minds who'd come to hear my research, I felt Emma's ghost finally slip away. She'd haunted me for so long, both in my previous life and in this one. Her cruelty had defined me, shaped me, nearly destroyed me. But not anymore. Now I was just Dr. Claire Carter, neurosurgeon, researcher, teacher, survivor. The girl who died at 28 had been reborn at 18, and she'd used that gift to build something beautiful and true and entirely her own. Emma couldn't steal that. No one could. And that finally was enough. Epilogue. 20 years after my rebirth, I published my first book. Not a memoir, I had no interest in dwelling on the past, but a medical text on innovative neurosurgical techniques that became required reading in teaching hospitals worldwide. I'd married a fellow surgeon, a kind and brilliant man named David, who knew my whole story and loved me not despite my scars, but because of the strength they represented. We had 2 children, bright and curious, who I raised to value integrity above all else. My parents had passed away within a year of each other, their final years marked by genuine love and support for the daughter they'd once overlooked. Their will split their estate evenly between Emma and me, though Emma's half was placed in a trust that only paid out for specific uses: education, housing, medical care. They'd learned not to enable her, even from beyond the grave. Emma had stayed in social work, eventually becoming a supervisor at a program for troubled teens. She'd married a man who worked in construction, had a modest life in a small house. We didn't speak, hadn't spoken in over a decade, but I heard through distant relatives that she was doing okay. Not great. Not the glamorous life she'd once craved, but stable, honest, real. Sometimes I wondered if she still thought about the stories she'd stolen, the future she'd tried to claim as her own. Probably. Probably she still harbored some resentment, some twisted belief that she'd been the wronged party. But it didn't matter anymore. Her thoughts, her feelings, her inner narrative, none of it touched me. I'd built a life of meaning and purpose. I'd saved hundreds of lives with my surgical skill. I'd trained a generation of doctors who would save thousands more. I'd loved and been loved. I'd turned my second chance into something magnificent. And somewhere in heaven or the afterlife or whatever came next, I liked to imagine that the broken, 28-year-old version of myself, the one who'd died alone in a psychiatric ward, defeated and destroyed, was finally at peace. She'd gotten her justice. She'd been avenged. Not through Emma's suffering, but through my success. Through proof that she'd had value all along, that her dreams had been worth fighting for, that she'd deserved so much better than what she'd received. The stolen stories didn't matter anymore. I'd written a better ending for both of us. And unlike everything Emma had ever created, this story was real. This story was mine. This story could never be taken away. The end.